Perfect. Thank you very much for your comments. And let's go on to the category of clean energy and energy efficiency. Dr. Julia Christian Smith, UCS, welcome.
We'll just
If you'd put the microphone a little closer. Thank you.
building on what others have already said, the Union of Concerned Scientists has been attending these climate meetings for many years, and coming away from Paris, there was just a palpable sense of excitement within the organization that the tide was turning. And Paris really, brought this global consensus to bear that we need to aggressively move towards greenhouse gas emissions. And locally, in our part of the world, SB 350 showed California's clean energy leadership and our seriousness about demonstrating the need for low carbon energy future. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today is the water sector's role in helping. The reason why is that I assumed a lot of people would cover some of the other issues, and that the second cap and trade investment plan adds a new feature, which is to support reduced demand for carbon-intensive water. And we've been working on this at the Union of Concerned Scientists. You all already know that moving and treating water around the state accounts for 19% of our electricity use, and heating it accounts for about 1/3 of our natural gas use. So there's a great deal of opportunities for California's water sector to contribute to climate change goals, but investments are needed to capture the full potential. The water sector is really at a crossroads right now, and I was lucky enough to go on a trip to Australia with some of the members here, and we saw some really incredible work. We saw in situ groundwater desalination at a cricket field. We saw sewer mining, cricket pitch. Yes, I knew I wasn't using the right term. I think we got a presentation about desalination in Adelaide. We didn't go see the site, but one of the things that struck me was all of these things are very energy intensive, as are our commitments to greater recycled wastewater in the state, desalination, our shift to groundwater. During the last 4 years, we've gotten half of our water from the ground, unprecedented. That's what we do during droughts. And was also interesting to me that it was in Australia, their desalination plant was 100% renewable powered. Compare that to our Carlsbad plant that's just brand new, and it's only got a 10% commitment right now. So I think really we're at a point where the water sector could be a big help, or it could kind of go in a different direction. And there are two ways that we could really try to capture some of the opportunities in the water sector. First is clean energy opportunities for powering the water sector, and the second is energy and water efficiency improvements. First, clean energy opportunities. Many water and wastewater utilities have significant electricity purchasing power. They often have experience generating their own electricity, and they own assets that could host renewables or provide demand response or flexibility to the grid. And so the water sector is kind of uniquely suited to provide a clean energy. It's already doing so. The East Bay Municipal Utility District is the first net energy producer. Their wastewater treatment plant has a 4.6 megawatt biogas turbine. And a lot of people have heard about that. They sell energy back to the grid. They actually make revenue off of selling the RECs to the renewable energy credits to the Port of Oakland. But what you might not be aware of is that Clovis and Fresno are right behind them. They have a 3.3 megawatt biogas turbine, and there's just a huge potential there. San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has solar panels on their Sunset reservoirs, 5 megawatts. Sonoma County Water Agency is putting in floating solar, the first floating solar in the state, 12.5 megawatt installation. Inland Empire Utilities Agency has been using wind, fuel cells. San Diego County Water Authority has inline hydro, so they actually put hydro turbines within their piping system. That's right now has a 4.5 megawatt capacity. It could go up to 64 megawatts if they are able to install it in 6 more locations. And then we have diesel to solar groundwater pumping, unknown potential because we don't know how much groundwater we've been pumping, except that we can tell from outer space that we're withdrawing groundwater at one of the fastest rates in the world. We are on par with irrigated agricultural areas of China and India. We do know that there's a lot of demand out there. ENERNOC, a demand response aggregator, just signed a contract recently to provide 155 megawatts of demand response for reducing groundwater pumping in Idaho and Utah, or shifting it to different times. So there's a lot out there, but I'm going to shift now to talking about efficiency. And reducing water consumption translates into reduced energy use. And the California Public Utilities Commission just finished an embedded energy water calculator that actually helps agencies figure this out. Also, the Climate Registry just finished a protocol for looking at energy intensity of water uses. Some state agencies are concerned that water savings will not reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions because that water will be used elsewhere. We've heard that a lot, and that's been a big barrier to investing in this part.
WR.
Okay, good to know. But this is not a capped sector. This is, again, one of those opportunity areas that LAO brought up. I would like to note that a similar argument, the exact same argument, was used in the energy sector in the past, and yet energy efficiency has enabled California to avoid constructing 30 power plants and will help avoid the construction of 11 plants in the next decade. So we can look at the same way at the energy efficiency and water efficiency savings. For instance, Marin Municipal Water District recently was able to defer construction of a desalination plant, very carbon intensive, $105 million investment because of its conservation measures. So I mentioned the California Public Utilities Commission's recent decision on its water energy calculator. It found that it was appropriate to use a default assumption of 2016 as a resource balance year, meaning the year when new supplies would be needed and savings could be credited from that point onwards. And so we really think that this sector is opening up, and the state can help the state meet its greenhouse gas reduction targets. We have opportunities through the Water Action Plan, through the drought funding. We saw a lot of investment coming in even through emergency services these last few years. Within the investment plan, you can see kind of nods to it in the water energy efficiency sections, the wetlands and watershed restoration, agricultural energy and operational efficiency, urban forestry, forest health, but there hasn't been this clear focus on how to get the biggest bang from the buck from this sector. And I'll just end by saying that further investment is needed to achieve the kinds of improvements I've been discussing, and that really this sector also offers the mitigation and adaptation together, because reduced water demand is a more resilient system to drought.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions in just a minute after we hear from Michael Shaw from
Thank you, Chairman Wieckowski and Chairwoman Pavley, senators as well, for the opportunity to be here today to talk about the second investment plan and how manufacturing can play a role in helping California to reduce GHG emissions and to reach our goals. I did want to start out with a couple of points. Obviously, the courts are still deciding some of these issues, so we won't delve into that because I think the subject matter is, a little bit broad of that. But it's worth noting, and the LAO brought this up, in its analysis and presentation, that there are some questions around all of this. And to the degree we can more tightly follow the use of the revenue during the second investment plan and beyond, I think the better off we are from that legal perspective as well. So my comments are kind of in that vein, so with the natural caveat of what the courts decide to throw out there. I did want to correct the record on one point, because I think Chairwoman Nichols stated that all IOU customers are receiving a climate credit. That is not true. The fact of the matter is that industrial, consumer, or commercial customers are not receiving a credit. In fact, there's one program that the PUC has in place for IOUs to return some of the revenue.
Residential and small businesses?
Small business, yes, but industrial users are not included in that scenario. So, all customers is not quite, the accurate, not quite as accurate as we would like it to be. But the IOUs, under the PUC, do have a program to return some revenue to customers in terms of a bill credit for energy-intensive trade-exposed industries. That's a limited sector of manufacturing. It includes some aerospace, satellite, and some other businesses that use a lot of energy and are negatively impacted by higher energy prices, but don't have the emissions that would put them into the cap and trade program and therefore be able to participate on that side. However, that revenue, that return of revenue has been delayed. We were expecting it in, say, the third, fourth quarter of last year. We've been told that it's early 2016, and here we are in February, and we don't have an estimate as to when that return of revenue is actually going to take place. So a number of our members budgeted that into their planning. So to the degree that the energy division at the PUC can accelerate that work, it would certainly go a long ways towards addressing that issue for manufacturing. I did want to talk about one thing. I mean, economic development as a goal of how we use the revenue coming out of the investment plan is something that we think there's an opportunity for manufacturing to participate in. Currently, we represent about 12% of California's GDP in the manufacturing sector. But however, we're only receiving slightly less than 2% of new investments in manufacturing versus as compared to the rest of the nation. And we have about 2% job growth from the end of the Great Recession, 2010, versus 8% for the rest of the country in terms of job growth. So we are seeing some manufacturing job growth in California, and we should not overlook that. However, we are seeing a situation where California is not recovering in this area of job growth at the rate other parts of the country are. So the degree, again, we can incentivize that activity, that growth in California with this revenue, that is a positive on both the economic and environmental front. One way that we think we can do that, and again, this also helps address potential legal issues as to the expenditure of the revenue should the courts uphold it. It also gives us the opportunity to accelerate some of these emissions reductions as well. If we can cycle that revenue back into the manufacturing sector in some way, that can be used for, say, projects that would further reduce GHG emissions. There are technologies like combined heat and power, which allows us to more efficiently use natural gas. That reduces the need for some additional electricity generation. And as Dr. Christian Smith mentioned, it's offsetting, potential need for power facilities, generation facilities outside. Again, more efficiently using the natural gas that many of our members require as a part of their business. That also gives us the opportunity to incentivize some additional growth in manufacturing in California, which, when paired with our stronger environmental laws, gives us the opportunity to have a broader impact beyond just GHG emissions. We can also look at, and the PUC is looking at this, rate restructuring. It touches both potentially the investment plan, but also just the work that the PUC is doing, so I won't spend too much time on this. But they are looking at changing time of use rates and implementing different types of systems that would incentivize the use of greater electricity when we have a surplus of say, solar and during the summer months and during the day. We can more effectively utilize that, effectively act as a sink for some of that as well. But we do think that the investment plan, while addressing a number of different areas and certainly mentioning industrial energy efficiency, I think falls short in this area. And we think that by addressing some of these other areas, we can increase the effectiveness of the investment plan, California's expenditure of this revenue, in a way that also creates some economic development opportunity. And we shouldn't, I'll close with this, we shouldn't look past existing industries. And I feel like that's often what we see in, say, the scoping plan and other documents is we see a 25, 35-year look at where industry is going, and we say that's what we're going to invest in. And that's certainly important to look ahead. We, as in the manufacturing sector, we have to be looking ahead as well to know where things are going because we have to be prepared. However, we shouldn't look past the industries that we have today and the opportunities that we have to reduce those emissions now. Because one thing, we have heard many times, in these settings, hearings such as this, and the ARB board meetings or workshops, is that reducing those emissions now has a bigger impact over the long term. So if we can accelerate by, say, cycling some of this revenue back to manufacturing in grants or programs that can help those businesses reduce their emissions now, that has a bigger bang for the buck than investing in programs that might not see realization of any actual emissions reductions for decades in some cases.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw. Okay, we're going to just stop right there and ask questions of any of these four people that gave a presentation, and then we're going to add on to you with the last two panelists, if I can do that, okay? So any questions of these four? Yes, Senator Wachowski.
The LEO has pointed out that they make a distinction between those industries that are under the cap. And if we gave credits to them, it would really sort of dilute the benefit, the impact that we could get. And you mentioned some of the manufacturers that are not under the cap and would benefit. Do you agree with the LEO on if we were careful of spreading the money out or allowing expenditures to go out to those industries that fall in between or rising industries, that is beneficial, or is your concern that just all manufacturings need to receive some of the revenues? Because they make a distinction between those who would already take advantage of it.
Correct. I mean, I would take issue with the analysis on that point. I don't think that cycling some of that revenue back to those industries that are currently, those entities, to be clear, the EITE or the energy intensive trade exposed, those are particular sectors or NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification Codes of manufacturing. There's particular elements of the industry. Those facilities, entities already covered under the cap they're two separate things. So I just want to keep those clear. As far as the entities that are under the cap, we would argue that cycling some of that revenue back to them, the source, in many cases, the source of that revenue, would give them an opportunity to accelerate emissions reductions, to reach compliance, and beyond in a much quicker and efficient manner, and that would have benefits to the state. The auction component itself is not necessary to reach our goals, though it is the source of a lot of this revenue for the state. But we think that cycling some of that revenue back to those businesses where it came from, much like we do in on the energy side with residential customers. I mean, the higher rates and the credit that goes back to them is intended to offset some of that higher cost. Yet we have a whole host of industrial entities over here who are not eligible for any of this return of revenue through the PUC side that could benefit and reduce their emissions faster on that side. So I would disagree with the LAO on that point, that it undermines our progress or is less efficient. We think that it can accelerate that if structured properly.
Dr. Christian Smith would say that if we were specific about providing manufacturers with, let's say, credits or assistance for water energy efficiency, or the carbon cost of water, that's not affecting the smoke stacks and the emissions, that you're on your own on that one, but we would reduce the bottom line. That appears that would be helpful and help us reduce aggregately the greenhouse gases. I mean, I see a distinction to a limited assistance program in the water sector versus your everyday manufacturing emissions, which you got to deal with Mary Nichols on that.
Well, certainly,
and that's not zero. That's not the whole enchilada, I think, is what I'm trying to make a distinction on. A specific element of the total emissions that you're producing.
Yeah, certainly lots of different ways that we could craft a program that would provide some benefit to manufacturing to help offset those costs. One thing to look at, on the natural gas side, just as an example, so on the energy side, electricity side, we have a program designed for return of revenue to all the residential small businesses. We have some industrial users. On the natural gas side, the PUC right now is proposing to return that all to residential customers and none on the industrial side. So, we have lots of different ways we can provide some assistance to those businesses to offset the higher costs and help achieve our goals. If it's dealing with water, I mean, that's an interesting opportunity. One of the things we found is reducing water use in an industrial side, oftentimes has the side effect of increasing energy use, because if you're doing some type of recycling program, things like that. So, the WET program, for instance, that the Energy Commission operates, does not really work quite as well in manufacturing as we would like it to, in that it requires reductions on both water and energy use. So if we can fix things like that, there's lots of different opportunities for us to invest that. So I'm not necessarily saying there's one way to approach this issue, but we can, I think with a properly crafted program, provide some benefit to those companies that are covered under the cap and required to make investments. We can get them to accelerate that in some way with a carefully crafted program. And on the flip side of this, we also have these command and control regulations that are in place, the others. And I think the combination of those two send mixed signals and don't also properly disclose don't send the proper price signal, I think, to some of our members in addressing these issues. So that's a slightly separate from the investment plan, but it's an area where we do need to do some additional work. And I know, Senator Pavley, has expressed concerns about where this revenue goes ultimately, how it gets used, to make sure we're doing things effectively. And I appreciate, Senator Hill's comments earlier on the cost effectiveness. So I think with a properly crafted program, we can address a lot of these different issues together. Thank you.
I have one question for CalSTART, President Bozell. My colleague of the Transportation Housing, or Chair of the Transportation Housing, I'll ask his question, or I think the question. I heard you talk and acknowledging the fact that the Tesla plant is in my district, and those $30,000 cars that are coming out next year, have everyone's attention, or hopefully have our attention. You didn't talk about trains in that sector and the benefit of electrification of trains, and as a driver for one of these areas that we're not paying attention to on greenhouse gas emissions, and I guess the desirability of having more people switch from their clean car to their clean train. Is there anything you can update us on?
We as an organization don't specifically focus on the rail sector, but I would say that in general, the best trip taken is one where you're using mass transit, or you're walking or riding your bike. So there is definitely, I think, as part of this overall solution, a need to invest more in transit and to make transit work better. I think that is part of the solution. We don't get directly involved in the rail side, but obviously some big benefits potentially from electrification of rail. Can I just want to quickly say, I realize I did forget to echo what Mary Nichols said about the important benefit of also investing in short-term lived climate pollutants and methane emissions, and that there is really a big opportunity to invest in dairies and others, help them capture that methane emissions, develop renewable natural gas, and a great opportunity there.
Yeah, we may see some legislation this year on that.